Welcome to CSO Insights webinar, 5 Steps to Better Strategic Account Management. With sales targets going up everywhere, many of us are focused on acquiring new accounts. Today, we'll explore strategies to mine the gold we already have in our account base. I'm Laura Andrus, and I'll be your moderator today. CSO Insights' Jim Dickie will review what our research tells us about best practices in strategic account management and the payoffs achieved by organizations who use them. We're fortunate to have Tim Brayman from Revinar with us. Revinar's website says they have the cloud-based sales and accounts planning software that drives strategy and revenue. I'd say they have a CRM 2.0 tool that makes planning, executing, and measuring much easier for sales and accounts teams. Tim will show you a practical application of planning and executing strategic account management and the results that Revinar's clients have achieved. I'll be back later for a question and answer session, so feel free to ask questions through the control panel so Jim and Tim can answer them. And now, let me introduce Jim Dickie to kick off the session.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, everybody, for taking time out of your day to be with us for this webinar. I know we're getting close to the end of the quarter, and so there's always a lot of competition for people's time. But hopefully today we're going to cover some things that will help you start to get some really good ideas on what you can do to optimize revenues for 2012. I want to share with you just a little bit of history on what we've seen about the percentage of reps making quota. We all know that we hit the economic turmoil back in 2008, and we actually saw the percentage of reps making quota in 2009 drop to 51%, got back up to 58% in 2010, got up to 63% last year. And so I think people are kind of buoyed by success. But let me share with you some of the results of our 2012 study. We actually went out and said, well, based on the fact that you had a pretty good year last year, what are you going to do about revenue targets for 2012? And we interviewed a little bit over 1,500 companies worldwide, and 94% of those firms said they were raising revenue targets for this year. 94%. That ties the all-time high in the 18 years we've been doing this study. But there was another follow-up question we asked, which was, okay, you got your number, and you're going to go execute on it. How do you feel about your odds of making that? And as you see here in this pie chart, that blue sliver of people who said, hey, you know what, we feel really good about hitting or exceeding our number this year. It should be pretty easily done. That's the lowest number that we've seen, again, in the history of our study. A lot of people said, hey, with effort we could meet it, but there's a lot of people that have concerns about this thing. So very few think that 2012 is a slam dunk. So let's talk about what our options are. In terms of looking at 2012, the number one thing that came out of the study was we need to increase revenues. So this is all about let's go find the gold. Let's go find the gold and mine it in our territory. But there are a couple different options there. And when we started talking to accounts, we said, well, tell us what you plan on doing in order to mine the gold in your territory. There was a lot of interest in let's go find new accounts. In fact, when we said what are the top sales effectiveness initiatives you have for sales in 2012, not marketing, this is actually asking sales execs, revising and enhancing lead generation programs came out number one. So that is something that we can focus on. We can go out and go after new accounts, try to penetrate, increase market share, et cetera. But that kind of got us thinking, is that really the best direction that we should be going? And so we went back and took a look at some more of the study data. We gathered a little bit over 130 metrics. And one of the questions we asked was, how long is your average sales cycle? And we split that. And what you see here is the numbers for going after a new customer. And we said, how long does it take to close a sales cycle? And you can see, some of these things when you're going after a new account, there are companies that are experiencing 7 to 9 months, 10 to 12, greater than a year. So it takes a lot of effort to go out and really go after new accounts. And you understand that a little bit better when I add in now what the sales cycle is when you're going after business from existing accounts, as you see here in the gray. A lot more things to the left-hand side, a lot more shorter sales cycles. And when you think about it, we all understand this. I mean, we've got established relationships. If there are existing customers, and there are also probably existing references to themselves. So it really kind of talked about, there is another option here, as opposed to, saying, let's go after new. What about if we also kind of blend in this whole focus of existing? And what I'd like to do is share with you some of the ideas on why existing accounts are probably something we need to do a much better job of mining. As part of our 2012 sales performance optimization study, and by the way, I'm going to go over these things pretty quickly, but we're happy to send you the key trends analysis from this study, which will explain this in detail, and we'll actually have the next 3 slides in it as part of the document. But what we did back with Harvard Business Review about 4 years ago was we did a study looking at the bottom half of this matrix, where we segmented companies who had taken our research based on what level of process they had, from far left were random process, everybody does their own thing, to informal process. We sort of have a way of doing things, but people kind of adapt it to their needs. To formal process, we've got everybody trained, they're doing everything the same way. To dynamic process, where the process is in place, but it's also monitored. We're utilizing CRM. We've got a sophisticated forecast management process. We're going through and constantly looking at what people are doing so that we can adapt our process as the business climate changes or the competitive environment changes or government regulations get stricter or more lax, whatever. And what we were able to demonstrate in that Harvard Business Review study was that as you go from random to dynamic, performance gets better. We'll talk about that in just another minute. But they came back and HBR asked us to take a look and say, there's another dynamic that you guys gather as part of your study, which is what's the level of a relationship we have with our customers. From we're one of many approved vendors to, hey, we're actually the preferred supplier in our space, to we've moved beyond just the vendor status and we're actually helping them implement what we sell, so we're solution consultants. Two, we're actually figuring out how that solution applies to meeting objectives for the year, so we're a strategic contributor. Two, we're actually taking a look at a longer-term strategy, look what partners, and we're really a trusted advisor to customers. And we're going back and kind of measuring again all the accounts every year on where do you fit into the matrix. And let me share with you some of the trends that are happening that really kind of demonstrate that account management is becoming a real key for a lot more companies. Is that we took a look and mapped in everybody into where they fit into the matrix. Now, you'll notice there are 2 gray areas here. When we found if you had a totally random process, you as a company didn't get to the trusted partner status. You might have individual reps who are, but the company's not. Conversely, if you look over to the far right-hand corner, you see a gray box that says if you get to dynamic process, those people have at least figured out a way to get to the preferred supplier status. But what we did was we mapped everybody else, and what we found is that 24% of the companies fell into what we call performance level 1, where they all performed about the same on average in terms of win rates, percentage of reps making quota, et cetera. Yellow thing represents 43% of the companies, and level 3 performance represents 33% of the firms. Now, to give you an idea of the shift that's been taking place and kind of this renewed emphasis on really managing accounts and deepening relationships, back in 2008, when we did this analysis the first time, level 1 performance represented 34% of the company. So that's now dropped down to 24%. And level 3 performance represented 17%, so almost a doubling. So what we're seeing is companies are going back through and saying, you know what, there's something to this. And what they're finding is this. Again, we segmented the companies based on level 1, 2, and 3 performance and looked at things that are really near and dear to VPs of sales hearts. In terms of, well, what percentage of my reps are making quotas? Well, you see on the far left-hand side, under level 1 performance, last year 55% of reps within level 1 companies made quota, but it gets up to 68% if we get to level 3. Similar type of move in overall plan attainment. But what's really interesting to us is the real indicator of we're selling more effectively is what's the win rate of forecast deals. Now, I want to emphasize again that what we're talking here is forecast. We're not talking pipeline, because forecast is things where somebody has thought enough of this deal to say, you know what, we really think that we can turn this into business in the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever your forecasting horizon is. And if you take a look down at level 1 companies, their win rates last year were 43%. 43% close rate. And I hate to point this out. I'm going to be speaking down at a sales conference in Vegas next month, but I went and took a look at the odds of what are the odds of winning at the craps tables, and it's 49%. So companies that are still at level 1 right now, their performance is very, very low. I mean, it's much better odds. They should be going to Vegas. They'd get better odds than they get on their own forecast. And I think that's the thing that's really driving a lot of companies to start taking a look at themselves and say, let's go back and what could impact win rates. One of the key things we found is if you go back to your existing customers, win rates go up. That's one of the things that happens when you get to level 3, is you're getting more revenues from your existing customer base. But if we know that we think that, hey, this makes more sense to us, we should be deepening our relationships. If we do, we get rewarded on those things. Let's take a look at how well we're actually doing it. Again, as part of the metrics that we collected, we said, let's take a look at things that if we were really having good relationships, we should be doing certain things really well. And so we took a look at some of the metrics like we should be doing a better job of cross-selling and upselling into our accounts. I mean, they already know who we are. We have their contract signed. They're working under existing terms and conditions. They get it. But what we're seeing here is that 48% of the companies we surveyed said, you know what, that's not a strength of our company right now. Versus only 5.3% said, hey, that really is something that's a core competency of us. The other thing is just farming new business from existing accounts. And what we see here again is, again, these are, if we're into a division of GE, why aren't we into multiple divisions? Or if we're into, parts of a company that are based in the U.S., why aren't we also trying to penetrate them in EMEA or APAC? So we're finding again that that's not a core strength for a lot of companies. Similarly, going back even to our existing customers and saying, hey, you already bought something for us. Let me show you about something new. 42% of the companies are coming back and saying we need improvement on that. So what that really said to us is there is a lot of untapped potential in the customer base. If we really went in and started having more meaningful discussions with these people, if we really tried to say, hey, can you introduce me to somebody in other departments, if we really try to understand how our products are really being applied and, get those things so we have success stories that we could go inside, we could do a much better job, we think, of really kind of penetrating those companies. But what we found is kind of, well, what's really kind of behind this? Why aren't we doing a great job of these things if they're so valuable to us? And one of the things that came out to us was 88% of the companies we surveyed said, you know what, we see account planning is key. What the choices were, we see account planning as mission critical, extremely important, useful, no impact. 88% listed it as mission critical or extremely important. So we all understand that account planning is that. But let's talk about the planning process. I remember going in, and a friend of mine, Mike Legato, was in a software company called Sybase years ago, and he talked about the planning process they went through for accounts. And he used this thing, he says, oh, yeah, that's the WARN planning process. And he wrote down on the board, W-O-R-N. And I go, I know a lot of acronyms. That one's not striking me. He says, well, we go through this kind of process every year where we get down, we put together our strategic account plans, and, the kind of catch-as-catch-can type of stuff. He says, but we've really realized that WORN is an acronym for write once, read never. And he says, we go through the planning process, but then we don't implement those plans. We don't change those plans. And I think that's really what's driving that, because when we ask companies, can you go back through and kind of assess where you're at, how well are you doing this thing? We know it's important. You got 55% of the companies that say that's just an area that we've really kind of got to improve on, we've got to really focus on. So that kind of struck us as, here's a dichotomy. We've got a problem right now. What we've got is, we know what we should do. We should be going back and penetrating those accounts. We should be mining the gold from the companies we already have, but we're really struggling with, how do I go about that? How do I actually do that? And so we started taking a look at, what are some of the best practices? Who are the thought leaders who have got real insights into how to do those things? And I had a chance to reconnect with Tim Brayman. Tim is the Senior Vice President of Sales Marketing for Revinar. And we just had this great discussion a few weeks ago where we started talking about, what do we need to do? How do we need to get more science in this process? How do we need to turn that into, it's not just something we do once a year and then we sort of forget it and move on to the other things. How do we really integrate this into our DNA so that we're really thinking about it at the sales rep level, at the sales management level, at the CSO level, and really at a customer level, a company level of how do we deepen relationships with customers. So Tim had some really great ideas on, a process, a methodology, if you will, because we understand what to do. If we're struggling with how to do it, that's really where we think we need to focus on. So I'd like to have Tim kind of walk you through his thoughts on best practices for how do you better manage strategic accounts. And then we'll come back and have some time for questions and answers where we can talk to each of you about what are the hot buttons that you guys are facing, and how could you apply some of these techniques to what you're doing, not only to maximize revenues in 2012, but really kind of take us forward into next year and the year after that as well. So, Tim?
All right. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. So in the next 20 to 25 minutes, what I'm going to do is focus on mostly a practical how-to approach. And I want to cover off three things, right? I want to cover off why strategic account management is so important. Number two, what are some key effective or best practices in strategic account management? And then third, raise it up a level. And from the CSO and corporate executive level, what are the key elements in implementing and operating a strategic account program? So Revigy is a part of a kind of a new generation of software companies. Laura described us as a CRM 2.0 application. And we're part of that group of companies that were tightly integrated with your existing CRM or SFA application like a Salesforce.com. And we and our peers provide applications that they drive collaboration, consistency, and enterprise visibility, basically bringing some science into account and opportunity planning. I'm not going to do a demo. I'm basically going to talk to you today mostly about how our customers execute effective practices in this particular world. So let's back up. Everybody knows the 80-20 rule, right? And so what this chart in front of you is showing is that, you know, theoretically we'd say 80% of your spend goes to 20% of your vendors or suppliers. But in reality, the Sales Executive Council, they did a study, and this 2008 study shows in their most recent year that actually only 7.7% of suppliers or vendors accounted for 80% of the average company spend, right? So the people in procurement for the last decade have been driving more and more revenue to fewer and fewer vendors. And as a matter of fact, this metric, this key performance indicator we're looking at, percentage of suppliers accounting for 80% or more spend, this is one of the top 10 key performance indicators, KPIs, on which procurement professionals are compensated and measured. So they get bonuses, basically, for driving down the number of vendors that amount to 80% of spend. So just a little tidbit, that might be something you consider the next time you have to negotiate with our fine friends in procurement. So as more and more spend is funneled to fewer and fewer vendors, you can clearly see the advantage of being a key strategic supplier. So let's look at this from the other end of the coin, right? So what's the impact to revenue to the suppliers and vendors in terms of revenue growth rates? So this is a 2010 report from the Strategic Account Management Association, right? And what you see on the left in the gray bars is those are the bars that represent the growth rate of revenue for non-strategic accounts. So basically a whopping 71% of companies said that their non-strategic accounts had growth rates of 5% or less. And think about it, this is during the most recent economic downturn, during the recession. But if you look at the green bars representing the strategic accounts, right, over 30% of companies said their strategic accounts were growing revenue 11% or more per year. And this is during a major recession, right? And if you look at it on an overall basis, frankly, strategic accounts were growing at twice the rate of other accounts. So there's a huge impetus, right? There's a lot of gold here for us to be mining in those strategic accounts, and more every day. So next, let's take a look at some why, now that we're looking at why we invest, let's take a look at what some of the goals and our performance indicators are, all right? Now these that you see on the screen, they're common goals and measures of success. For us to be successful, what we need to pick is what are our goals and what are our metrics. So for instance, last week I talked to an enterprise software company. They said that they're seeking an additional $30 million in additional incremental revenue over 3 years from each of their strategic accounts, right? So they're looking for customers where they have a strong chance for that kind of growth, and those are their prime targets for strategic accounts, all right? So grow revenue significantly in those accounts. However, a couple of years ago, I had another customer with a different situation, right? They're in the financial world, and they're based on a subscription model like a lot of us. Now, they were having some real challenges with their revenue growth. Now, their customer growth, the number of customers they had was growing significantly, but when they looked at the detail, each year, they lost a few really large key accounts, some of the whales. And each whale more than wiped out the revenue gain of a dozen new mid-sized customers. and they dive a little deeper in this, what they saw is they had a customer loyalty and satisfaction issue. Okay? So for them, their reason for implementing strategic accounts was to drive customer loyalty, and they were going to measure that with something called Net Promoter Scores. The key to being successful at this is to pick some specific goals and metrics that you want to impact, and then frankly, measure the heck out of them. Now, all right, so I'm a fan of old TV movies and music, so you're going to see a couple of cliches in here. And the first one's from that 1970s TV show Kung Fu. Choose wisely, grasshopper. The most important thing is what are the criteria that you're going to use to prioritize your account. There's only 168 hours in every single week, right? So where are you personally going to invest those? Which accounts, and what's the criteria that you're going to figure out to leverage and choose wisely the most important and valuable accounts to you? The second thing is to get everybody speaking the same language. There's nothing worse than being in a meeting, you know, and I call what we're doing account planning, and somebody else calls it a customer roadmap, and then I refer to them as a company, and somebody else refers to them as a customer, and somebody else refers to them as a client, a third person refers to them as account, right? So we spend way too much time trying to get on the same page. We need to make sure that everybody's using common tools and common language in this. All right? Then the next thing, straight from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand. Now, I'm actually a real big fan of this one, and frankly, you know, I'd have gone ahead and paid Stephen Covey the $30 for his book if he'd just given me one sheet of paper that listed the 7 habits and not forced me to read all 300 pages of his stories. But anyway, here, this is really crucial. And we're talking about the client's business strategy and how they measure success. And then the next thing is to realize, you know, the strategic account manager, global account manager, whatever you call them, they're not in this alone. They've got to build an internal team. And that internal team is going to include maybe some industry SMEs in your organization, potentially an executive sponsor, consultants, whomever, right? So you assemble the appropriate team for your account. Now, the team has to be committed to driving success at the account. This does not mean that the team gets together at that fun account planning session that we have once a year, and they get to critique all the work of the strategic account manager. Frankly, everybody on the team has to be putting in equivalent effort. They get assigned work to do based upon what their particular role is for this account. And then the other thing, let's list a radical idea here. Let's invite the customer to be a part of the team. So try and find a mentor or a coach in your account. You know, a mentor or coach, in my parlance, is somebody who's willing to expend political capital on your behalf, not because they like you, because you have demonstrated in the past that you're focused on helping them succeed and their company succeed. And then also, there's going to be some enemies out there. No matter how good you are or how friendly, everybody's got enemies in an account. We've got to figure out who they are. And frankly, it's really hard to convert them, so we need to figure out how to neutralize those people. Okay? Then the next step here, take the long way home, right? Don't go fast. Collaborate with the customer. You know, people prefer that you do things with them as opposed to them. So let's build a framework and a path towards that trusted partner relationship. And then, once you get that big deal, well, don't take the money and run, right? We want to stick around and deliver the value. A sales process fundamentally is a promise to deliver value to the customer. So let's make sure that they get that value so that we don't get just one big deal, but we get predictability in big deal after big deal after big deal. Okay? And then make sure we get the credit for what we've done. And then lastly, as it says on the shampoo bottle, lather, rinse, repeat. Make strategic accounts really part of your culture. Do this over and over. So let's take a look. What you're seeing right here is a screenshot from the Revinar application where, you know, what we've done is given you the ability to provide a consistent view of account priority. You know, so we're automatically leveraging specific account selection criteria and sales intelligence, and then we're plotting these accounts on a 2x2 grid based on their current performance, which you see across the bottom, which is mostly focused on revenue, and then their potential value to us. Right? There's two problems right now with prioritization of accounts. Most people go through a simplistic A, B, C accounts, and that's based either either on the size of the company, the revenue that they have, that they generate every year, or their amount of spend with us, right? Or the other big problem that we seem to see is that maybe somebody provides a target account criteria list, and then after that we're going to go on gut feel as to what, whether this account really fits those criteria. So we need to add some science to this and gain an enterprise holistic view, right, of what are our high priority accounts. And so what you'll see here is in the upper right-hand quadrant, those are companies that are generating a lot of revenue for us, huge current performance, but also they've got huge additional incremental potential value. And the best up there is our buddies Acme Rocket. So anybody out there who's a Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner fan, you've worked with them before. So those dark green accounts, great current revenue performance, huge additional potential. Now if you look down to the yellow ones, you'd think, okay, those companies generate a lot of revenue. They should be prime targets next for strategic accounts. But in reality, I would argue that the upper left, the light green accounts, where the revenue potential today is not significant, or the revenue amount today, rather, is not significant, but the potential value is huge. And to do this, you've got to look at some criteria. So, first and foremost, we're looking at future revenue growth, right? And this can be direct or indirect. So I had one customer, they knew that, frankly, in a specific industry, if they took down the industry thought leader as a customer, lots and lots of other companies in that industry would immediately pile on board and buy their solution. So that was an indirect reference, right? But maybe we want to look at direct reference. What additional business units can we penetrate? What additional geographies can we penetrate? What additional products can we bring to this customer? And then we need to layer on that things like, what's the effort level and the investment that we would have to invest in this customer in order to achieve that potential incremental value? And maybe something else like, what executive relationships can we leverage to further penetrate the account? Another common criteria used is competitor. How well penetrated is our competition? And what's the customer's perception of the competitor? And then lastly, don't forget their willingness to partner. Back in the 1980s, Walmart was the largest customer for most of the consumer packaged goods manufacturer. But back then, Walmart was solely interested in the lowest price. So I would suggest that we don't build a strategic relationship and invest based upon low margin business and being the low cost provider. Now after you've chosen your accounts, I suggest that you have a process framework to hang everything from. Now I've got here a simple linear process that shows stage 1, we're going to do account planning. Stage 2, we're going to align with the customer and get them on board. And stage 3, we're going to execute. Now some people use kind of a calendar approach, a circular, that shows months of the year, and we line up our actions and activities by calendar date. And that's fine. Either approach that you take, though, you need to line up with the customer's fiscal year and not your fiscal year, right? You want to be bringing your best ideas, your thought leadership to the customer before they enter their budget cycle and not after they've already locked down the budgets for the new year. So what you'll typically see in an account planning process is that under each of these stages you'll have a series of activities. Now I've left them off just to simplify the screen and shown just the key milestones that measure our progress. So one of the most important things to avoid that write once, read never that Jim talked about is to make sure that we have milestones in account planning and execution that we have enterprise visibility to. And we know that we've accomplished some body of work either internally or with the customer. So we've got our preliminary account plan complete. Check, that's a milestone. We took that plan and the associated investments to management. They signed off. Check, that's a milestone. And then down there, you'll see something called draft account plan, draft joint account plan. What this is the plan that you're going to collaborate with the customer around. Remember earlier I talked about how people prefer you to do things with them and not to them. So they don't want to be the target, right? They want to be your collaborative business partner. So what you need to develop is a multi-year collaborative business plan or joint account plan that you bring to the customer that talks about the value that you can deliver. And oh, by that way, that value is measured in terms that the customer really, really cares about. And you need to take that to your coach or mentor in the account and have them socialize this inside their company. What I call get their fingerprints on the weapon. And then what you need to do is to take that plan as modified by the customer, get the customer to agree to it, and then launch into that plan with the customer. And most importantly, you need to make sure that you start to measure the business value realized, right? So you got an entree to the executive suite by talking about business value. Well, your return ticket to the executive suite is to conduct those quarterly business reviews. And the quarterly business reviews are focused not on a project status report, but those quarterly business reviews are based upon, here's the value, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, that we have delivered to your business. And so once you've got a common process, you can hang tools, and your common language starts to move through the organization. And then now we're into the seek first to understand, right? So when I say understand, I'm talking about the customer's business strategy. And this is the strategy that's defined by the CEO or the board of directors or the president of a business unit. It's their goals and objectives and how they're going to measure success. And so what you get is, and this is, one of our customers kind of cleaned up and mocked up to protect the innocent. The CEO says, okay, we've done a ton of acquisitions lately. Let's make these acquisitions work and deliver value to our shareholders. And we're going to have a one bank initiative. And under that, we're going to have an operational efficiency side, and we're going to have a revenue enhancement side to really drive up our profitability. And so this works a lot like Star Trek, right? So you got Captain Jean-Luc Picard there as the CEO saying, make it so, number one. And then each of the lieutenants, each of the C-level and EVP level direct reports, they take that strategy and they build out their supporting objectives and initiatives to deliver on the board and the CEO's vision. And so what you get over here on the left is the CFO says, okay, well, one of the ways I'm going to do that is reduce overall corporate risk. And the COO says, I'm going to implement, continuous innovation philosophy and some projects under that. And we get the EVP of the commercial bank who says, I need to retain my key clients and do better cross-sell. And then the EVP of the retail bank says, well, we're going to leverage that innovation to actually roll out net new retail products. Right? So this is their business strategy. And one of the things that you have to make sure you do is don't mistake the tactics or projects underway as the actual strategy. So a lot of these strategies will turn into projects or tactics. As a matter of fact, I had an account manager, and he was working on a major Midwest university. And so we were doing an account briefing, and he says, okay, well, the strategy of the university is to implement a campus-wide voice over IP and wireless network. And I said, really? I would think that a university would be something about education, learning, students, research, something like that. He says, good point, let me get back to you. So after a little more digging, he discovered that this was a tactic that they put in place to support their strategy of reducing costs and also to attract more technologically oriented students and professors. So that later on, when this account manager had a chance to present to the board, instead of talking about cool wireless technology, he talked about the value delivered to the customers and the professors, right? And so one of the questions people ask me often is, well, how do I find this information out? Well, it means you've got to collaborate. You've got to go ask your customer. But I'll give you a tidbit. One place for major accounts where you can get this information is that every quarter, the CEO and the CFO go on a road trip. And they presented all these financial analyst conferences that Goldman Sachs sponsors, or Fidelity, or Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, etc. And that presentation, the PowerPoint presentation that the CEO and the CFO present to the analysts, talks about, their business plan and their strategy and how well their strategy is working. So that's a great place. Those investor presentations are typically in the investor relations portion of the website. Great place to dig up that information. All right, so now we understand what the customer is trying to accomplish. Next thing we need to do is to move on and take a look at who are the players in the account. So this is another snapshot from our application. You see a visual org chart where we got CEO Gary Greenfield up at the top, and he's got Marie Jones, the CIO, and Bob Steele, the COO, reporting to him. Okay? A friend of mine used to call this the who's who in the zoo chart, right? So it's absolutely essential for us to know not only who the people and the reporting hierarchy, but where's the power, the influence, and where are the relationships that we can leverage? You know, frankly, the org chart doesn't tell us a whole lot. I bet almost anybody on this call has met a senior executive. They've got a big title. Maybe they got a lot of people reporting to them, but frankly, they're an empty suit, right? No real power, and they're not part of that inner political circle at the company. So let's make sure that we know who's who in the zoo. We know that Ayn Rand and Bob Steele, they're green, they're friends of ours, okay? We've got Nicole Park over there on the side. She's red, she's an enemy. Well, these are problems. I got to deal with that. So let's also highlight who on our team is part of this. So on the far right in gray, you see Edward Marks. He's our global account manager. He owns the relationship with Gary Greenfield, the CEO, and Bob Steele, the COO. We got Mark Silver, our industry expert. He's got Mike Jacobs and Nicole Park. And over on the way left, we see Ashley Samuels. She's technical account manager. She owns 2 relationships in the technology world. Now, that's just the start. We've got to layer on top of this more information. What kind of relationship do we have with these people, right? So, you know, is it a case of Edward Marks? You know, you've met Bob Steele, the COO. You know, is he able to actually pick you out of a police lineup? Or maybe are you so close to friends that he's going to name his firstborn child after you, right? So where are we on the scale? Now, I'm not actually suggesting that that should be your real scale, but I'm trying to paint a picture of what we might use. And then how influential are these people? You know, the example that I always used was from years ago, a television show called MASH. And the most influential person in that entire organization was Corporal Radar O'Reilly. He got things done. Amazing influence. When Radar said something, and it was the truth, and everybody followed. So relationship mapping is a crucial first step in understanding what relationships you can leverage and where you need to go. All right. Now, the last thing in the process of account management that I'm going to talk about is getting credit for the value you deliver. Okay? So this is basically working with your customer to get them to measure the business value that you deliver, right? So this is not about customer satisfaction. It's not about how many priority 1 trouble tickets were resolved in less than 4 hours, or where we are in meeting our SLAs, or the number of product defects they found, right? All that kind of stuff is table stakes. To win at this game, you got to have the value level. You got to strategically contribute value, and one of the ways to do that is to provide insight into their industry and competitors, basically new ideas that the executives haven't considered. And you need to work with the customer and develop the scorecard for things that they value, right? And then get the credit for what you deserve. Build the scorecard, let the client tailor the scorecard, and then make sure that they grade you regularly. So let's step up a level. What are some of the key problems in addition to those that our customers are trying to solve with our applications? Right? One of them is a lot of us are still challenged with multiple business units or silos. We don't have a consistent process. We don't have an effective way to collaborate as a team. Plus, if you look at the Strategic Account Management Association, you know, they say that on average in a strategic or key account, there's more than 12 influencers and decision makers. There's an awful lot of politics going on in our customers. Managing that number of people is very challenging. And not only that, we've got the politics on our side of the wall in our actual company that we also have to deal with, right? Because if it's named as a strategic account, there's big expectations related to both revenue and margin for us to deliver. So these are some of the common risks and challenges that any strategic account manager needs to be prepared for. And then if we go up one more level higher, right, looking at this from the C-level in our organization, you know, what are some of the risks, barriers, and critical success factors that we have in implementing and operating a strategic account program? So one of the very first things is we've got to have executive leadership on board. We've got to get them to walk the talk, right? And then we've got to make sure that compensation is based on the behaviors and the outcomes we seek. You know, this sounds really simple, but frankly, it's one of the hardest things I've ever seen people have to implement, right? You know, if your SAM is compensated primarily on monthly revenue goals, right, it's really, really hard for them to act in a strategic fashion. And then, next, let's make sure that we're focusing on strategic accounts, that it's a key part of our overall business model and go-to-market strategy. And then the next part is communicate, communicate, communicate. I met a couple of weeks ago with the Chief Operating Officer, and he told me that they'd launched a strategic account management program about 6 months ago, but it wasn't really being effective and it wasn't well received in the organization. Okay, well, how did you launch it? He said, I sent out a very detailed email with what the program was about and what everybody was supposed to do. I said, great start. And what did you do after that? He said, nothing. I sent out the email. I told them what to do. So I'm going to suggest that maybe we need a continuous communication plan to drive that change and awareness into the organization. And then lastly, we're going to have to walk a tightrope, right? We've got a balance between short-term results that Wall Street wants and that giant pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So let's talk a little bit about that giant pot of gold, right? Right here, what you see is from the CSO Insights Sales Performance Surveys, right? And let's take a look at moving not from the bottom, but from average up to trusted partner. If we can climb that ladder, right, we're talking about significantly higher win rates, and we're talking about lots more reps making quota. So that 12.5% bump in win rate from industry average up to 20 to trusted partner is hugely important, not just to top-line revenue growth, but when you reach that trusted partner status, you have a larger number of deals that you can win and on basically a no-compete model, as you're the default or de facto partner. We had one of our customers that was well penetrated. They're a business intelligence customer, right? They sold analytics and reporting tools. They were well penetrated in this pharmaceutical company. Lots of business units used them. And, they were well known at the end user level, and they were well known in the technology team. They were great at helping the marketing team find new markets and new customers to challenge, and they did some phenomenal work on the supply chain side, right, where they'd gone in and helped analyze some supply chain inefficiencies and barriers. And they'd helped the company save millions of dollars on the supply chain side and grow revenue. But, they had a ton of fans in the organization, so anytime a new geography or business unit was looking at BI tools, they were always invited to the dance, but they still had to compete. So they entered this particular pharmaceutical company into their strategic account management program. And lo and behold, based on that strategic engagement model, 9 months later they were talking, they talked to the customer about the value they delivered and the value they could continuously deliver. 9 months later, they had a multi-year enterprise license agreement with this particular customer. And not only that, the company, because of the enterprise license agreement, the CIO had to sign off if anybody in the entire enterprise wanted to buy a different business intelligence reporting tool. So they built a huge barrier to entry for their competition. So there's huge value if you can move up that scale to trusted partner. And then lastly, let's talk about the value that was achieved for one of my other customers, where they were having this problem with the whales were leaving, and it was really seriously damaging their revenue. So they measured success based upon net promoter scores, where they looked basically at the loyalty instead of customer satisfaction. Now, I don't know who said it, but satisfied customers leave in droves. You want to build barriers to exit. You want to build loyal customers. So this customer, their net promoter score was a -22 the first year they implemented strategic accounts. The next year, they took their 75 largest customers and put them into a strategic account management program. In that 1 year time where they embraced this model of strategic account management, the net promoter scores for those target 75 customers went from -22 to +12. Now, that's not where they want it in terms of ultimate net promoter and loyalty, but it had a huge impact on revenue retention, as well as they now got visibility in each of their customers into an enormous number of new opportunities that they'd never seen before, and their pipeline actually tripled. So, what we've talked about in this particular program is, the industry forces that are driving you that are driving our customers to spend more with fewer. I've talked what I hope are very practical steps and tips in terms of how to implement a strategic account management program and what your process should look like, and talked also a bit about the value that you can achieve. Thanks, everybody, for your time. I'm going to turn things over to Laura for Q&A at this point.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, people, this is the time when we play Stump the Expert. I have a bunch of good questions for Jim and Tim, and if any of you have other questions, we can probably take a few more. Just put them in at the question pane. And what we'll do, I guess, Jim and Tim, is just have each of you take a stab at answering whatever you think you can. I have had several questions about how to prioritize strategic accounts. So I'm going to read one of them, but there are several people interested. We find we don't have an easy way to prioritize our strategic accounts. Everyone seems to have a different opinion. Do you have any recommendations for what method could be applied?
So this is Tim. I'll take a quick stab at that. So the first thing that I'll typically look at is two factors. One is, what kind of a relationship do we have in this account? Do they perceive us as valuable, right, in terms of our relationship with them? And do we have senior executive relationships that we can leverage? And the second thing that I'll look at is what I call a white space analysis. I look at each of the business units and geographies that can purchase solutions like we provide, whoever the company is, and see if there's a lot of white space out there where we could put new product into either a new business unit or new product or an existing product into a new business unit, or any of those metrics. And those are the two cornerstone elements that I'll look at. And then, frankly, I'll add maybe a few other things based upon, how big's the competition, how deeply entrenched is the competition. Those are some of the things that I typically look at. And the key here is to continue looking at it every single year, because things change, right? You may have had a CIO that did not like your company, and maybe the CIO leaves in the middle of the year. So next year, you don't have that enormous barrier to penetrating the account. So the real key is evaluate criteria, look and see if they're the right ones, if they're generating the results you're looking for, measure the success of penetration, and then each year go back and evaluate your key accounts to see if there's new contenders that come in, or frankly, if there's accounts that should fall out.
Great, Jim. Let me share one other strategy. So we have an old friend of CSO Insights, is a gentleman named John Williams. John has been one of my heroes for years. He took storage tech from $800 million to $2.2 billion in 4 years, so roughly tripled revenues without adding a single net new rep. So I had the same headcount 4 years after he started the program. But he put together a strategic account plan, and one of the things that was just a simple tactic, but I thought was brilliant, was that he would go through, and as reps were putting together their account plans, he would say, okay, I want you to tell me, here is the list of our competitors. Who are our competitors' biggest accounts? Who are they generating the most revenues from? And he would say, here's a way of going in, engaging it, that these guys are spending a whole lot of money with somebody. Why isn't us? And then go back through and start to say, are these guys really in there just because they've been there for a long time, or do they really have deep relationships? So I think there are some new ways of thinking that we need to bring to the process that says, let's go take a look at a lot of different things, but the potential that Tim's talking about is a key concept, because John went back through, identified 55 accounts that they weren't doing a whole lot of business with, that somebody else in their space was, and at the end of the 4-year period, about 30 of them had become strategic accounts for storage tech.
That's helpful, Jim. I have a follow-up to that. Who do you think has ownership of the decision of which accounts become strategic accounts, and how collaborative do you think the process should be?
Well, I'll take a start. This is Jim. I think it ought to be very collaborative, but at the end of the day, I think you've got to have it be sales management who makes the ultimate decision based on what's going to happen. They're taking a longer-term view of the business. I think they're more seasoned professionals. They should understand things. They're also the people, if we need to go get support from other parts of the enterprise to go and deepen relationships, maybe we need to get customer support more involved, or finance, or product development, or whatever. They're going to do those things. I think you really have to have, somebody making a strategic decision for the company versus somebody saying, I got my number and I just have to hit it this year.
Yeah, Laura, I'll echo that, right? Because one of the things you want is executive management and sales management to collaborate and come up with a standard set of criteria. Now that doesn't mean that, you know, every region and geography. So in North America, we might have, you know, 80% of the same criteria as they do in EMEA. So I want to make sure that there's that commonality and consistency, because otherwise you're going to lose scalability. You're going to start running into language barriers and process barriers, especially if you've got global accounts that you're trying to service.
Yeah, that's for sure. Tim, I think this question's for you. That relationship map you showed, are you supposed to put people on it who affect your work in the account or on a specific opportunity?
So since we're talking strategic account management, I typically start that at the account level, right? So there, you know, in a strategic account, you may know 100 people, right? You may have a stack of 100 business cards on your desk from a key strategic account. But what you really want there are the key influencers and decision makers, and not everybody in the organization. So map out what your relationships you and your team have with the key influencers at the account level, and then when a deal pops up, when an opportunity pops up, you copy that and whittle it down to those people who can help you win that opportunity. That's the way I approach it.
Yeah, sounds good to me. One other one, Tim, that's aimed at you. Does Revinar provide strategic account management methodology or just technology?
So that's a great question. So we have a framework, but we're not a sales training vendor, right? So we provide technology to companies. We have our own frameworks that we think have effective best practices built into them, but our vision is really to be a technology provider to support your account management methodology. I'm not a fan of one size fits all. In my world, most people do things a little bit differently based upon their solutions, their go-to-market, and their customers.
Okay, that seems clear. Hey guys, how often should account plans be reviewed?
Is constantly often enough? Let me bring up one thing. I think this gets back to the whole nature of dynamic process, is that you should be putting these plans in place and then having the means of which to go back in and track, are we tracking to those things? So in reality, what we're seeing is with some of the CRM 2.0, you know, innovations like Revinar, you know, you're able to go back in and do kind of the management by exception thing, so that if something's getting off track, if somebody is supposed to have been part of the relationship grid and you're supposed to contact with them and you haven't, well, you want to be able to see that. If somebody's still red and you were planning on having them being at least yellow by the time you do the demo, you can see that. So I think we should constantly be having ways of getting updated if things aren't on track, so that we can deal with them proactively versus reactively. But we ought to be assessing these things on an ongoing basis. So, you know, putting together a plan and having it sit in a 3-ring binder is nothing. We should constantly be going and saying, okay, based on the economy changing or politics changing the company, geez, we got to revamp the strategy. So we always ought to be willing to take a look at this and say, is what we planned the right thing still today?
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. I think, you know, you want to look at updating and reviewing account plans in 2 axes. You know, one is milestone-based. So in your process, you're going to have some major milestones, right? So you want to have a management review. That's a great place to do it. After the customer has come back and told you, here's a better way, or here's how we want to modify the way we want to engage, that's another great time to do that. And then on a periodic basis throughout the year, you have minor reviews, you know, in precursor to your quarterly business review or triannual business review with your customer. So I put some major stakes in the ground where we're going to spend, you know, 50 minutes to an hour together to review the plan. But, you know, with as mobile as everybody's becoming, you know, with, you know, wireless laptops and iPads and, you know, Droid devices and all that, you know, there's no reason we can't update and spend 5 minutes updating a plan with the latest interaction of a major presentation we did, you know, once a week, investing that 5 minutes in touching up the plan. And frankly, it's got to be everybody on the team, right? If it's just up to the global account manager or strategic account manager to do this, it's going to fall apart. It's got to be a team effort.
Yeah, no kidding. and this is really on that subject too, what kind of metrics should managers be looking at to judge how reps are doing with accounts?
Well, it's interesting. As part of the sales management optimization study that we're just concluding right now, we put in a question regarding what are the metrics you use to decide which reps need more coaching and mentoring. And there was a lot of different opinions on this thing. You know, a lot of people said, well, you know, we use pipeline activity. So, you know, have there been meetings scheduled? You know, have there been emails going out, et cetera? But I think Tim brought up, you know, really interesting point of are you having the right meetings and making the right progress with the right individuals? You know, if we're really able to have a whole bunch of appointments, but they're at lower level individuals who are not going to be part of the decision-making process, they're really just influencers, then that's a yellow flag for me. If we're not talking to the guys in finance, but, you know, we're talking to a lot of guys in IT, that could be a yellow flag. So I think you've got to say, what's the quality of the interactions that we're having with people, and are they moving the ball forward versus just, hey, I saw that you had 6 calls with a company last week, way to go. It's, well, let's talk about those 6 and were they meaningful and what are they going to lead to next?
Yeah, Jim, I'm totally on board with that. And what I'm looking for my team is evidence, right? I want evidence-based observation. So what evidence of that the customer, our strategic account that we're working with, that they're doing something based upon our actions, those are the things that I think are very important. So, you know, have we identified a coach or a mentor who's willing to circulate a joint account plan with senior executives? Wow, that's a huge evidence that these people are willing to partner and willing to embark with us, right? That should be a critical go, no-go decision there. Or, you know, were we able to present the joint account plan to the senior executives and gain their buy-in? So some evidence-based things based on your business model and strategy are things that I really want to tie exactly as Jim's talked about.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. I like that. I have one more question. I think maybe then we'll probably have to wrap it up. Are you seeing companies change comp plans to motivate account penetration?
Well, Tim brought up the issue of compensation, and you know we do an annual compensation study in the fall, where people are putting together plans for next year. What we've really seen in there is that a lot of compensation plans, where it's really your wallet, is being tied to a revenue number, not necessarily the mix of accounts or where it comes from, et cetera. And I think that, you know, Tim brought that up. We need to do more of that, and I think that you've got to start driving behavior based on compensation. I had a friend, Tom Blondie, who's known in the technology world as the turnaround CEO, and when tech companies are in problems, they bring Tom in. And one of the first things that Tom does to always get people focused on strategic account management is when he comes in, he changes the compensation plans for reps. And what he typically does is he says, okay, when you close the deal, you don't get 100% of your commission that's due you. You get 2/3. And the other third you're going to get 3 months from now after we interview the customer and we find out how satisfied they are with what you sold them and how we delivered. So don't overpromise, you know, but it really gets people thinking about, hey, you know, we're looking at this thing for the long term. And I think there are a lot of ways we can utilize compensation to really drive that behavior and drive people to think about, let's spend more time penetrating this account versus, oh, there's a brand new lead over there with somebody we've never done any business with. Let's go chase that one for a while.
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything to that. Great answer, Jim.
Well, I think you said it was hard to do, right, Tim?
Well, that is true. There seems to be some kind of barrier from HR, it seems. You know, the larger the organization, you know, once you start cresting a couple of billion in revenue, it becomes really hard to get HR engaged with this concept, which is why you've got to have senior executive commitment. Somebody who can, you know, walk over there with a, you know, a carrot-shaped stick and whack some of those people into the appropriate shape.
Carrot-shaped stick, that's a good one. Okay, I'm going to stop now. We got a lot of good questions that we haven't had a chance to answer, and I'm going to promise you that we will put the answers to all your questions on our blog in the next day or two, so that you will have an answer, and I'll have both Tim and Jim take a stab at it and make sure that you get a complete answer. Also, for those of you who were disappointed that you didn't see a demonstration of Revigy. I suspect that Tim would be thrilled to give you one. So let us know if you'd like to see a demonstration, and we can get that set up for you. You see on the screen that you will receive the white paper, Mine the Gold you already have, and a link to the recording of this webinar. It won't be ready till we have the webinar link ready. It should be in the next day or two. Thank you all so much for your patience, attendance, and the great questions you asked. Jim and